Hi, and welcome back to Southern Redhead Redfoxx Reviews. We are in the month of February. Here in the United States, we celebrate Black History Month. And I am an avid reader and lover of history, and more importantly, African American history. So this should be considered as a story time. A story time slash reading. And so, just to give you a little background, I was an education major, and one of the courses that I took along my journey was African American topics in history. And of course, we covered various topics, and it was just right up my alley. I learned a lot of information. We had to write a lot of books, and I had a research paper that was due in that December. And so all of the readings that we and the assignments that we covered through the semester, we had to compile that information into a final research paper. And I chose the topic of blues was a form of liberation for African Americans. Okay? And the reason why I chose this topic was because, again, I am a connoisseur of music. I love music. My grandfather was a preacher, so I was raised in the church, and I understand religion and religious song and spirituals. And then I also had some family members that were into the blues. So from a little girl, I used to hear the blues. And because I was fond of music, one of our readings during the course covered some music. And so I made a connection with those readings, and I formulated my topic. And I formulated that blues was a form of liberation for African Americans in the United States. And before I begin reading my paper, I want you to understand that liberation is a term that's used as freedom. So basically, this paper is going to cover African Americans using blues as a form of freedom. So I'm going to delve into the paper, and you will get a full understanding of the concept of the relationship between music and freedom in African Americans. And it will also give you some history with our music here in America. It's going to begin with religion and spirituals and go into blues. And I never forget, I was so excited. I wrote this paper. I cited all my sources, and I have them here. Because I was able to bring it to life, because I had a concept, I had a thought, because I know what music means to me. You know, music was my sanity growing up. That's why I love it all. And so I would listen to music all the time, all types of music, cassette tapes, DVDs. I just was fascinated by music. I loved it. It calmed me. It soothed me. And because I knew that it did that for me, I could just understand what it meant to those who were suffering. And so hopefully you will enjoy. So again, African Americans use blues as a form of liberation. Through slavery, Reconstruction, and in freedom. Let me stop here. For starters, we're very familiar as African Americans about slavery. But once the Civil War ended, there was an era, a period that was considered the Reconstruction era. That was from 1863 to 1877, and it followed the Civil War. So this was a time that the United States was reconstructing, trying to get their bearings, where African Americans were trying to get their footing, their bearings, and get an understanding about what was life going to be like now that they no longer had a master and had to live and be a slave and pick cotton in the fields. Even for those that lived in the South, did it mean that you migrated to the North? How did you make a living? Things of that nature. So the period after slavery is Reconstruction. Now, at the end of Reconstruction in 1877 followed the Jim Crow era, and that was from 1877 to 1964. So let's begin. Through slavery, Reconstruction, and in freedom, African Americans suffered tyranny and degradation from slave masters and whites that encouraged the vehicles of spirituals and blues music. The inner source, the soul, the mind, and the original essence of African Americans during slavery were represented through religious song, and in freedom through secular songs. In my readings, I have identified the complex meanings of spirituals and the blues as a form of liberation. From this, I will thoroughly explain the black culture of the spirituals that influenced gospel music and the blues as a genre of music. Within this research, I will compare and contrast the very similar and distinct differences of the two musical expressions among African Americans. The blues and the spirituals were both one and the same. They were from the same search for the truth of the black experience. The spirituals and the blues were the bodily expression of the black soul. Moreover, to state that both of these vehicles of music were a form of liberation for African Americans, both in bondage and in freedom, there must be a clear study of the lyrics and the events and the association of the two. In my findings, I have identified that to understand the spirituals and the blues, one must comprehend the meaning of the musical expressions and their beginnings. The Christianization of slaves was not widely accepted among whites in the South, with the belief that slaves were not in need of religion. Due to their damnation and inability to go to heaven. Moreover, whites argued the hearing of the gospel required time that could be economically productive. Slaves gathered together in a religious assembly might become conscious of their own strength and plot insurrections under cover of religious instruction. There was an English tradition of long standing that once a slave became a Christian, he could no longer be held a slave. Despite the beliefs of Christianity, the religion was spread throughout plantations by missionaries. The brand of Christianity that was preached to slaves justified slavery. It was argued that Paul and other New Testament writers issued specific instructions for master and slave relations, thus apparently approving the practice. Many slaves genuinely embraced Christianity. Moreover, white missionaries persuaded the blacks that life on earth was insignificant because obedient servants of God could expect a reward in heaven after death. From this, the slaves endured repeated beatings and ill treatment from their masters and resorted to seek salvation from God. Their introduction to Jesus Christ with the belief in him to receive everlasting life, in addition to their ancestral roots in Africa, brought about the black culture that we know today. The birth of the blues began on plantations in the Deep South, as slave-filled hollers, spirituals, work songs, shouts, and chants. This musical tradition was the history of a people from the ancient, African slave coast, with an array of melodic styles, which merged together in the cotton fields of the South. Through their songs, the slaves shared the rhythms of sorrow, their fear, and hopelessness. During the Jim Crow era, the blues documented the experience of Southern blacks better than any other form of cultural expression. According to Howlin' Wolf, he answered the question of what is the blues? In response to himself before an appearance, he answered, when you didn't have any money, you had the blues. When you ain't got no money to pay the rent, you still got the blues. I must convey that there are varied beliefs on the meaning of the blues. I am afraid that I came to think everything worthwhile was to be found in books. But the blues didn't come from books. Suffering and hard work were the midwives that birthed these songs. The blues were conceived by aching hearts. The importance for me to delve into this writing is based on the correlation between spirituals and the blues, though different. I will identify the spirituals as religious and the blues as a secular style. Spirituals are songs sung by Negroes through slavery that sang to their God in heaven. The spiritual was solely religious. Spirituals were inspired by the message of Jesus Christ and his good news, the gospel of the Bible. The religion of Christianity played a major role in the lyrics, chants, worship, and praising on plantations. At church, hymns and psalms were sung during services. Some of them were transformed into songs of a typical African American form. This style of song offered the slave who suffered oppression the faith to endure the turmoil of their lives. Booker T. Washington stated, "The plantation songs, known as spirituals, are the spontaneous outbursts of intense religious fervor. They breathe a childlike faith in a personal father and glow with the hope that the children of bondage will ultimately pass out of the wilderness of slavery into the land of freedom. And singing of a deliverance which they believed would surely come, with bodies swaying, with the enthusiasm born of a common experience of a common hope. They lost sight for the moment of the auction block, of the separation of mother and child, of sister and brother. There is in the plantation songs of a pathos and a beauty that appeals to a wide range of tastes, and their harmony makes a abiding impression upon persons of the highest culture. The music of these songs goes to the heart because it comes from the heart. Believing that God delivered Daniel from the lion's den, as well as the children of Israel, the slaves felt that they too